This is the drill that every lifter is going to reach for the moment that they notice that their shoulders are wiggling on their bench, especially when they're about 3 inches off their chest. But there's one thing that almost nobody checks before using a drill like this. So in the next few minutes, what you're going to see is why these shoulder packing drills that you do with bands can feel productive, but even after doing a few sets, will still leave you prone to that same issue every time you load up a PR on the bar where your shoulders move around and you can't keep things packed. And there's one test that actually explains what's going on beneath the surface with your shoulders that needs to be considered. And I know this works because this is one of the first things that I've done for the last 12 years when I'm starting with a new lifter and they're struggling with their bench. On top of that, I've been the coach behind 52 podium finishes in my time coaching and 2 national record benches. And so about half of the lifters when they get started with me, no matter how long they've trained for, whether it's their first couple of years of lifting or they've been at it for 20 years, will actually fail the test that I'm going to show you in a second. And as they get better at that screen, what they find is that all the cues that they were using on bench, all the special drills, all the band work, all the variations, all that actually starts to translate a lot better into how well they can hold position on their third attempt bench. And so the pattern is this. You set your bench up, you're going to really try to retract and depress your shoulders and keep them packed. But then as you start to come down, you get about 3 inches down and it just feels like you completely lose control. Your shoulders will start to peel off the bench. You might see this also present as like your elbows flaring or your arch collapsing. And then you just feel like the bar just drops on your chest and there's no juice left. And this gets really frustrating, especially when you can take a 90 or 95% single and know that there's more in the tank. But then you load up what should be a max and you just flop around like a fish on the bench and get staples. And most lifters are gonna know to watch for their elbows flaring out or keep their chest lifted or even try to keep their tempo locked in on the way down. But the moment your shoulders get unpacked, everything becomes so unstable that none of that really matters anymore. Like they're looking at outcomes instead of inputs. And so if you don't address the underlying mobility requirements first, and you try to train that range of motion with shoulder packing drills and pull aparts and all that kind of stuff, it's like trying to go walk through a brick wall. And unless you're Harry Potter, you're not doing that. And so if you're trying to keep a really strong position and you're gravitating towards those drills and quick fixes and things you found on Instagram, they're great, but there's this sort of subtext with all of those that in 30 seconds or 10 reps, we're gonna fix your bench technique. But the less sexy answer that actually works is you're gonna need to spend some time for the next few weeks, maybe 5 or 10 minutes a day, doing the boring stuff to hit certain benchmarks that we need. And that's really what's going to separate the lifters who are lifting just because it's fun and they'll like maybe get stronger with some sets of 5, and if their singles don't go up, their life doesn't change. And the lifters who actually take it seriously and see things progress to the point where they're actually a dominant force in the bench portion of their powerlifting meets. So bringing things back around to mobility, I think we can all agree that if you can't bend your hip to like 100 degrees, you're gonna have a really hard time hitting squat depth. But with bench, it tends to be a little bit less obvious when there's a mobility restriction because of how much contortion and arching we use in the press itself. With that said, those mobility benchmarks are the foundation to being able to move through it. And so what we're looking for here is to be able to get about 90 degrees of easy shoulder external rotation. This means with your back flat, you can get your wrist in line with your shoulder, and about 40 degrees of internal rotation without your shoulder rolling forward. And when you have that, then focusing on stabilities and cues makes a ton of sense because that's the next step on that mobility, stability, strength continuum. But a lot of lifters skip right to focusing on stability without even knowing how much range of motion they have to work with, and then get frustrated when nothing carries over to their bench because they're starting in the middle without setting a base. They're trying to walk before they can even crawl. And if you're trying to really optimize for top end 1 rep max performance, this level of granular fine tuning is the difference between a third attempt that gets decided based on your strength and what you loaded on the bar and those two matching up, and ending up in a position where you hold back on your third attempt because you're like, if my shoulder stays in one piece, I'll be okay. And you get stuck being very conservative in a sport that requires you to bring a certain level of aggression. And I see this all the time with lifters where they'll make this sort of joke in passing about like bench's intermission in the meet. And that's really just cope for, I didn't figure this lift out, or I didn't figure out how to stay healthy enough to figure this lift out. And the more catastrophic version of this is their shoulder actually gets so bad from not addressing the foundations of mobility with that 90 and 40 degree benchmark we talked about, that it slowly gets worse to where low bar squatting becomes out of the question, and they have to do safety bar exclusively, and then they can't squat in a meet, and then they get relegated to deadlift only at best with competing. And it's just this slow slope of the slow motion train wreck that I see a lot of intermediate lifters get stuck in. And so just like you need to learn how to brace and do a bodyweight squat before you can do a front squat, before you can do a high bar squat, before you can do a low bar squat, every progression that you do to get to that point of doing the competition lifts on your squat, bench, or your deadlift has to earn its place and have a logical reason and sequence to get there. And for your shoulders, getting there is going to start with testing the joint range of motion first, to make sure that you're actually ready to progress into learning how to stabilize that range of motion. And then keeping your ego in check if you do need to take some time building your base, because taking that 5 or 10 minutes a day to work on the basics is what's gonna get you further and further away from the people you leave behind who don't put that kind of work in.